why gay men are more likely to develop PTSD, also known as post-traumatic stress disorder. Hey guys, Michael Pizzulo, psychotherapist here in West Hollywood. So I want to talk to you about why gay men are more likely to develop PTSD. Often when we talk about gay trauma, we think about the trauma of being gay. So for example, a lot of gay men are traumatized because they faced harassment or bullying or even violence because of their identity. But I want to talk to you more about why gay men are more likely to develop PTSD when they experience trauma that really has nothing to do with their identity. So just to give some context, we know that some people experience trauma, you know, go through it and process it and emerge on the other side relatively back to their old selves. And other people develop PTSD. It's a post-traumatic reaction. We don't exactly know why some people develop it and some people don't. There's certain trends that we are aware of, but we're not exactly sure what the clear mechanisms are. But we do know that a lot of people that develop PTSD do suffer from really distressing symptoms like anxiety, depression, substance use, even SI, self-harm. It can be really quite debilitating. So I want to talk to you about some of the risk factors that I think gay men have in particular. So the first one is adverse childhood experiences. So we know through ACE studies, that children who experience a lot of developmental trauma are more likely to develop a lot of poor mental health conditions as adults, including PTSD and other trauma stress disorders. The reason being, and we don't know exactly for sure, but the reason being that if you think about your development as the time when you're really strengthening your armor, developing your resilience, and then if you're not given the proper tools to do that, then when you are an adult and you're met with something that's overwhelming or scary, that if you have been nurtured appropriately, you may have the resilience to bounce back from it. But if you're already experiencing a lot of deficits in terms of your self-worth or your ability to self-regulate, that whatever you experience as an adult may become traumatic. You may have a more traumatic reaction to it. And I would argue that gay men growing up, in the closet, facing social discrimination to some degree or another, likely experienced some sort of developmental trauma as a result. And so they may have less resilience to dealing with certain types of stress in adulthood. And that's something that you want to be aware of and just think about. The other thing is lack of social connection. So we know that one of the biggest healing components when working with trauma survivors is group support. Group therapy is very important. Community, even just sharing your story, having a witness to it. These things are really, really healing and very compelling. And gay men, if you think about it, are often more isolated socially than others. For example, oftentimes they are distant from their families of origin. They may be estranged from their families altogether. Less likely to have children. They're creating their own nuclear family is often less common. So the lack of social support, also less likely to be plugged into communities like churches and and more traditional structures as well. So having less social support is another big risk factor too. If you experience a trauma, but you have all the social support already around you that you can lean into right away, you're much less likely to develop PTSD. But if you experience trauma and you just have to process it on your own, then it's much more likely that it will metastasize into more of a PTSD or post-traumatic phenomenon will emerge from it. And then the last thing I would say is the lack of specialized resources. So luckily these days there are a ton of mental health resources and therapists and so on and so forth, which is great. And we really encourage people to seek mental health treatment these days, which is a really fantastic thing. But most of these resources are not specialized, particularly for gay men. And then also trauma is another specialty. So if you're a gay man seeking trauma therapy, you're going to need to work with someone who has two specialties, that intersect. And most folks and most clinicians just aren't going to have those. So I think what often happens is that even when someone does seek out help, they seek out help that isn't quite right for them, and they just don't get a lot out of it. So those are the three things that I think really contribute to why we're seeing higher rates of PTSD in the gay community, among gay men as opposed to among the, straight heterosexual community. My advice is really work on combating those things. So strengthen your social support as much as you can. I mean, you're going to need that to develop resilience through anything that life throws your way, right? Work on developmental traumas now. Don't wait for something to trigger you or for a big, upheaval in your life to begin doing work on yourself and things you've been through when you were younger. And when you do seek help, make sure you find someone who is specialized and really knows how to work with you and your specific issues. So I hope this was helpful. If you need any resources or referrals, please feel free to reach out.